This is an unscripted video. I have no script, and a lot of things I say here come from here. Greetings, my name is Nina, welcome back to my channel. There's something I keep thinking about and I decided to talk it here in front of the camera. I originally wanted to write a script for this video. I decided to speak live. I'd call it live because I have no script. So if you clicked on this video, you understood what it's about. We're going to be talking about epic fantasy franchises, or to be exact, that we need a new one. The world needs a new fantasy franchise. The world, aka me. Remember those days when Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones were popular? They were everywhere. Remember those times where everyone and their grandma were talking about the series? And even people who had no idea what was going on, people who have never seen a single film or an episode, or read the book, they knew. Remember those times when we were waiting for a new installment in the series? Well, I sure do. So I was 7 when the first Harry Potter film came out. I remember. Those series got me for the next 10 years. After the Harry Potter films ended, well, along with the books, of course. I was waiting for the books too. Well, after the Harry Potter ended, then came Game of Thrones. I've mentioned a lot here that I was obsessed with the series. I kept waiting for the next season of the show. Well, season, because the books still aren't finished yet. I do remember those times when 2016 hit. I was... the only thing I could think about was the 6th season of Game of Thrones. Good times! To be honest, I did not even care that the show was slowly but still going downhill from there because the books ended and they ran out of the material. But I just didn't care. I just loved the show, the series so much. And then Lord of the Rings. Okay, at the time the films came out, Lord of the Rings books were finished series. It took 10 years to finish Harry Potter, both in the books and in films. And it took around 8 years of Game of Thrones. The books, well, they took slightly longer. I am part of the generation that witnessed the release of each Harry Potter installment. I do remember the times where the series were everywhere, the phenomenon, everybody talked about it, everybody kept waiting for the next installment, be it a book or film. I'm using Harry Potter here as an example because as the Harry Potter books were coming out, so were the films. I mean, they were paralleling each other. And Lord of the Rings books, they were already finished long before the first film came out. And with Game of Thrones, well, the 5th book came out the same year as the first season of the show. And the show is over and we are still waiting for Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. My point here is that the series were a huge deal. There was a lot of hype surrounding them. And now, 5 years after Game of Thrones ended, with no 6th book in sight, with Harry Potter series being over a long time ago and Lord of the Rings being a finished story too, I thought recently, this year, and then I realized one thing. I want a phenomenon similar to the series. I mean that I want a new epic fantasy franchises that would last a decade, that people would talk about a lot. Quick note, it probably wasn't really correct to use Lord of the Rings here because, the books have been out since forever, or to be exact, around 70 years. It took 3 years for us to see the films. Whereas Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, they lasted over a decade. Alright, moving on. Remember those times where everybody was obsessed with the things, when we were excited for the next new installment? I realized that I want these times back. But unfortunately, as I want these times back, so do the studios owning the rights to the series. And this is why we have so many prequels, sequels, midquels, whatever. However, as it turned out that people don't really turn up for these things that much. Well, Fantastic Beasts were a thing. first film came out, everybody was like, yeah. The second was pretty dull, although it had a few nice plot points. And the third one, well, I haven't seen it, had zero interest. My interest went down. And then the Fantastic Beasts movies that were supposed to be a 5-film franchise, they were cancelled. And what about Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones? So we have Rings of Power and House of the Dragon respectively. I watched the first 2 episodes of House of the Dragon, they were nice. But then I lost interest. And the Rings of Power, well, the only good thing I can say about Rings of Power is that the show gave a lot of content to YouTubers, and the YouTube reviews were nice to watch. I did watch a few scenes from Rings of Power, and the actors were okay, and that's all. That's all I can say about the show. But overall, all of these projects, Fantastic Beasts, Rings of Power, and House of the Dragon, they all failed to capture my attention. Well, House of the Dragon looks more or less nice, more or less interesting. I'd rather watch that. But the other 2, nah, zero interest whatsoever. And also, I made a tier list of my favorite books, and I've said that A Song of Ice and Fire is sort of a past favorite. But then, after I went through a few pages recently, and before I released the video about A Song of Ice and Fire, I understood that I still love the series. And what most importantly, no series came close to A Song of Ice and Fire. No series captured my attention as much as A Song of Ice and Fire did. So after A Song of Ice and Fire, I had The Dark Tower, The Witcher, and what else? Dune, Wheel of Time, The Kingkiller Chronicle, The Stormlight Archive, The First Law. All solid series, all solid stories in their own right. I love The Kingkiller Chronicles very much, which is also unfinished. And coincidentally, the second book, the last one in the series so far, also came out in 2011, just like Dance with Dragons. As much as I really like Kingkiller Chronicle and the Stormlight Archive, and to a lesser extent Wheel of Time, none of the series came close. None of the series captured my attention so much. Okay, I am not going to list all the great things, just to watch the video, it's still relevant. When I say I want another epic fantasy franchise, I mean that I need a new phenomenon. And I do think that the world would benefit from said phenomenon. The world did benefit from such phenomenon once when Harry Potter was everywhere and Game of Thrones too. And here's the main point of the video. I want a new fantasy franchise to take over. And not just the books, but I also want the books to have really strong screen adaptation that would get people to talk about it. Yeah, I know that Wheel of Time and with The Witcher had their own TV shows, but do people really talk about them? I do not see people talk about the series that much. And even if people do talk about the series, the perception is mostly negative, unfortunately. No, that's not what I want. In this video I keep saying that I want a new fantasy franchise phenomenon, but however, I do not only mean myself, I also mean the world too. And vice versa. The epic fantasy franchise, the loud one I want, isn't simply the one that simply came out. I want the one that would get people to talk about them. I want a fantasy franchise that would get people waiting for the next installment, be it a book or a film or a season of the show. That doesn't really matter. I really want a big, large phenomenon. I really hope it happens in the nearby future. I did really notice a pattern. So when I was little, Harry Potter was there for me, and then after Harry Potter finished, I watched the Hobbit films. I forgot to mention the Hobbit, and I do not count the Hobbit as a prequel, sequel, midquel, or whatever. Well, because it's an adaptation of a book, and The Hobbit came before Lord of the Rings, and it's nothing like Rings of Power, so I didn't count it at the beginning of the video, so I'm saying it now. So I watched The Hobbit, and slowly before Hobbit finished, I discovered Game of Thrones, and it has been my big obsession. Oh, and I also watched Marvel films, but they were slowly losing my interest, and I haven't seen a Marvel film since Endgame, Avengers Endgame came out. I thought it was a pretty good finale, and I did not continue watching the Marvel films. I decided there was no point. The story was finished. Here's one sad thing about franchises today in early 2020s. I hope that's going to change in the future. There's a lot of focus on nostalgia. Who cares about interesting plots and characters or settings or whatever? Nostalgia, nostalgia, nostalgia. That is going to feed the studio and the actors, of course, and everybody else involved. And nostalgia is quite an insidious factor here. This is the factor that got me watching Fantastic Beasts. And luckily, at least there was some substance in the film to forget about the nostalgic factor. However, a lot of other pieces of media weren't so lucky, because nostalgia, more nostalgia. But here's the sad truth of those nostalgic works. They're all secondary, they're bland, unoriginal, boring as hell, and they lack all the features that made original so compelling in the first place. And what's most importantly, when these secondary works they come out, a lot of people are like, yeah, you got that right. You think that the release of the next Marvel film or Rings of Power of House on the Dragon excites me? Absolutely not. Granted, I lost my passion for the films and TV show in recent years, but these works weren't that exciting in the first place. Were at least not enough exciting. I'm saying not enough exciting because House of the Dragon was more or less good, or at least the first 2 episodes were. I do realize nowadays that the power of finished stories. So Harry Potter is finished, Lord of the Rings is finished, and what else is finished? Even the Marvel movies in some way are finished with Endgame, and even Game of Thrones. I know a lot of people hated the ending of the show, but at least it's still finished. And as much as people hated the ending of the show, there's no denying that the show was a massive phenomenon. It was very loud, you couldn't escape it. So the series are finished and let them be finished. So Avatar The Last Airbender is also finished. So let that TV show and every other piece of the media I mentioned here, let them stay finished. I do understand why these works are being made for financial reasons or for copyright extension reasons, yada yada yada. However, there's a lot of book series that exist that deserve an adaptation, and people and those big studios should pay attention to them. So since Game of Thrones ended, it has been quiet. Harry Potter united a lot of people. A lot of people were excited. I want something similar to happen again. And mark my words, this isn't going to happen with all the secondary works coming out. I mean that the prequel or midquel or sequel or whatever to a successful work. Like I said, I know why this happens, but at this point, I don't give a fuck. Give the world a new epic franchise, an original work, with a strong adaptation, like I said, that would unite millions and millions of people. I want a great screen adaptation of a great book series that people would love, people would be excited about. I want the times of those phenomena that was in the 2000s and in 2010s. I want this to come back. And I definitely believe that the work has to be an original work. So I mean that a great phenomenon, like I said, it's not going to be a sequel to Game of Thrones or prequel to Lord of the Rings or whatever. Original work, yeah, I did really notice that some franchise was there for me throughout my life. Some series was there for me. I kept waiting for the next film or season of the show or a book or whatever. Now there has been none, well, except for probably King Killer Chronicle or the Stormlight Archive, but that's still not the same as Harry Potter and the Song of Ice and Fire. Not the same. Maybe a strong adaptation would help, but King Killer Chronicle is unfinished, and the Stormlight Archive is going to be really difficult to adapt. Maybe they should adapt Mistborn. Mistborn would be really cool to adapt. I did really notice this trend in TV shows that it takes a few years between seasons. I mean that in the past it took 1 year to make a season. That was the thing with Game of Thrones and even with The Walking Dead, as I remember. But these days they make TV shows with huge gaps between seasons. So you have, for example, in 2022 the first season, and then you have the next season in 2025, and even the next season in 4 years or something. The show has to be consistent. Films, they can kinda afford such gaps, but not the TV shows, I think. Alright, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, this little rant of mine. This, like I said, this video is unscripted. I'm simply saying what comes to my mind, and I hope I managed to do that. Maybe with a script it would have been different, but still, maybe this video is much more natural compared to the scripted videos. But anyway, I made my point clear. I hope in the nearby future we're going to have a big adaptation of a big series. A quick note, it doesn't have to be the series that I read, the Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, the King Killer Chronicle. Maybe it's going to be a new book series that I have never heard about and that I would be interested in after the adaptation. After all, I got into A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter after I watched the adaptations. See you next time. Goodbye.